Bam! What's up, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chem, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every week, Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic deep dive and having a good time while doing it, usually joined by a solid crew of allies every week. And I certainly appreciate you guys making the trip to wherever you're watching from, YouTube or Facebook, and hanging out with me for a bit. So before we get into it, let's do the usual housekeeping. If you guys are not getting my emails, you are messing up. You can go to masterchimletter.com, masterchimletter.com, and sign up there. There's also all and any relevant links in the description, depending on where you're watching. YouTube, I think we're doing my main YouTube page right now we're streaming to, along with 2 Facebook pages. Let's see what's going on. So if you are on, say what's up. I love when you guys check in. Jesse, what's going on, brother? Good to see you. I think you're pretty much, one of the first ones here every time. Jamie was also part of the early adopter crew, right, of these talks. My man up in Canada. And let's see. All right. So today I sent an email this morning. Jan Saxa, good to see you. So you just pop on there. I sent an email this morning, as I usually do, talking about my intention, some of the talking points, the topics that I wanted to cover today in today's talk. And I usually try to put a couple of questions in the email because it serves as a good prompt for me to begin my discussions. And as usual, if you guys have some feedback and questions, feel free to write it in the chat, and I will definitely address it. Corey says, "Good afternoon. Can't stay, but a hectic work schedule." Right on, Corey. Then you catch it later. It's going to be a good talk. I'm a little biased though, so take that with a grain of salt. So today's topic, the title for today's talk is the weakness of blame. The weakness of blame. So a couple of premises that we're operating from, starting it that way, is that there is weakness in blame, right? So, which I obviously believe there is, and I don't think people in general would disagree with it to some extent. Where that extent lies would be the debate, I guess. But certainly people who've been following me for a while and have been sort of absorbing my message all these years, this is not necessarily something new for you. Right? We'll flesh it out in different ways today during the talk. But this idea of blame being something that we should not aspire to master is certainly a familiar one to those of you that are following me. So what did I write in today's email? First thing I wrote, blame is where information becomes validation and catharsis. A general sentiment that I've made over the years, it might have even been included in TRIBALNOMICS in the book, is that communication should not be catharsis. When we are communicating, if we are doing it with the primary or even sole purpose of some sort of cathartic ritual, where we're saying shit to feel better, in other words, that is not what communication is best utilized for. Obviously, then, it begs the question, what is communication ideally used for? It is to convey an idea. It is to manipulate an outcome. It is to engage with another identity in a way that allows you to benefit in some way. There is a purpose to communication, but when we use communication or the connection with another person as a conduit, a means by which we ourselves feel better, it's a process that always exposes that alliance with the other individual to a level of vulnerability that I think is unnecessary on the low end. On the high end, outright irresponsible and self-destructive. So communication in general should not be cathartic. Now, what are the exceptions to this? Well, if we're communicating to our fucking therapist, obviously, get it out, I guess, right? And I would even argue that, and there's actually more proof now. Don't ask me to cite studies, but studies have shown, I'll get away with that general statement, that and I've already felt this. This has been my position for a while. I've been coaching, men over 20 years at this point. The idea of tell me about your problems, it is a very limited idea in terms of utility. So when you have these therapy relationships, these relationships with therapists, whereby every week you rehash everything that's ever caused you a negative outcome in your life, like there's a tendency for those things to sort of root themselves that much more effectively in your relationship with your life. There's a certain point where, you want to let something go away, stop fucking talking about it. On the other end, we say, what's one of the ways to achieve immortality? We create a legacy that reverberates through history, right? So long as people say your name, you are alive, right? There's this, two sides of a coin, where this one position is concerned. But again, getting back to communication, we shouldn't be talking just to feel better. So then if you're somebody, and this is like a little bit of a little pigeonhole where we're starting this talk off with today, this whole communicating as catharsis thing, it really comes down to, is it the best? If you're looking to have some sort of cathartic, reset, is communicating to somebody else the best way to do that? And I would argue no. I would argue that if there is some sort of foundational problem, right, some dysfunctional set of circumstances, ultimately you're going to have to address those root causes of what created the problem in the first place. But in the moment, in order to feel better, in order to bring us into a more optimal state, communication is not what I would go to anyway, because number one, it relies on another person, right? So right off the bat, you are anchoring your ability to bring yourself to an optimal state on the participation of another identity. Therein lies vulnerability. It's not that, hey, you have a friend, you talk to your friend, you feel better. It's not that that is inherently bad. It's just that if the only way to feel better is to talk to that particular friend or talk to a particular class of friends, well, I guess you better never feel bad when those friends ain't around, because you are going to be, by your own design, helpless in managing your own internal state. Instead, I would opt for other types of rituals. I've spoken about these over the years, and I'm certainly not. I'm not gonna drop some sort of epiphany for you guys to pick up, during this particular, observation. But, it's like, yeah. Some people meditate. Some people hit the bag. Some people go lift weights. Some people read a book. Some people have sex. Some people, I guess if you're by yourself, you could do that kind, right? But whatever it is, they have different means by which they can make themselves feel better without relying on another person or, even worse, sabotaging an alliance while you are in a negative state, right? I was talking to my mastermind group this morning, and I said one of the paradoxes that I've battled with as an adult is I really get annoyed when I see men so emotional that they find themselves interacting with their allies from a point of being in a bad mood, right? It's like, oh, he's in a bad mood today. Watch out. He's not joking around today, or whatever the communication is between people that, refers to some member of their crew that is just in a bad state. But I said the paradox exists in that I get into a bad mood when I see men acting like they're in a bad mood. So it's something I'm always, battling with. But the idea of it is, our problems and the mental state that results from being exposed to those problems, those things need to be separated. And the means by which we feel better, its purpose, its outcome, its proposed outcome, its end game is to have an effective state. We want us at our best. But then ultimately, no matter how, effective a state we're in, we're going to have to take that state and actually address the root cause of the problems. So communication as catharsis is vulnerable for all those reasons, right? Jamie writes, grief parasites want you in anguish forever. Absolutely. And there will be people, and then some bot that I made years ago said, message sent, check your DM. I think if you write parasite, there's like an auto message you get. If you guys want to fuck around and see what happens, just write parasite. I think the bots will send you something. But to Jamie's point, the grief parasites he called want you in anguish forever. There are people who feel better when you feel worse. There are people who feel better when you feel worse. Now, it begs the question, well, why would you want any of those people around? Because if you did a little bit more self-reflection, oftentimes you'll find that you're also one of those assholes that feels better when your allies are doing worse, right? So there is a dysfunctional aspect to those relationships. And it all stems from an individual attaching his own relationship, his sense of self-worth, the level of self-power, to use one of my terms, on the approval and the participation of other people. There's just a vulnerability there that it's unnecessary, right? We should be looking to internalize all the mechanisms by which we could bring us to our best, right? To the best of our ability, of course. Johnny Groove, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. All right, so back to the email. Question I wrote, first question. When does useful intel morph into an anchor of one's capabilities? When does useful intel morph into an anchor of one's capabilities? And let's get specifically into blame now. A common misconception when dealing with blame is that blame is a hot potato that could only be possessed by one individual within the transaction, right? Within the conflict, within the situation. A bad outcome is produced. Everybody looks at the cast of characters and wonders who gets the potato. In the real world, that's not a functional relationship with what the concept of blame should be used for. If we say, what role did I play in this outcome? That is something that could be said by every individual involved. And at the end result of everybody asking themselves that question, what role did I play in this outcome? At the end of it, there is more power than before you started. As soon as everybody agrees that there's one individual who is going to bear the blame for this outcome, two things happens. Number one, every other individual is never forced, or at least prompted, to have some sort of introspective process that assesses where their accountability should lie, where they participated in the construction of this outcome. So that's the first thing that happens when only one person takes the blame. Nobody actually gets to find their role. But the other side of it is that the person who gets the blame, everybody inaccurately attributes his specific actions to the totality of the outcome. So it generalizes the cause of the outcome in a way that cannot be reproduced, in a way that is not consistent, right? If a bunch of people gave bad directions to a driver in a car and they wind up in a wrong spot, and there's one person who gave the most directions, or the person that gave the last directions, or maybe the first directions, if that person is labeled by the group as the blame for them being off course, it ignores the participation of all the other people and the role that played. Because you might now remove that person who was ultimately bearing the blame of getting lost, blame it on him. And now when we travel to the next destination, he's not allowed to talk. But we wind up getting lost again because all the other contributors to the first problem were still present. They were never accounted for, right? So they still get to talk and the group still winds up in a wrong spot. There's usually enough blame to go around. So if we look at a unit of blame, right? A unit of blame, let's say it's the total accountability of all contributors to an outcome. That means everything that influenced this outcome, totaled together, is one unit of blame. The question should always be, how is this blame going to be divided so that we wind up stronger as a result of that process? I've said, before, when debating racism with people, right? And online, it's usually, and running a school in New York City, I've had a lot of these contentious discussions with Black men and women, usually men. And when you have somebody, a Black guy, could be a girl, it's happened before, but most of the time, Black guy, when he is, operating from a premise that he is victimized, that there is something being done to him, or his inability to progress can be linked to some sort of ancestral wrongdoing, whether it's slavery, Jim Crow, or regular old, I don't know, R&B racism, right? I don't know, like regular racism, I guess, to add another category. And you have this conversation, and they start using these very persuasive, fictional constructives like, systemic racism and all these other, I don't keep up with all the buzzwords. But they basically create a story that allows them to reverse engineer the outcome that they begin from. The outcome, of course, being that they were done wrong and they are owed something. And, they talk about the racism and this and that. And at a certain point, you go, I've done this in the past where I go, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. There is no way you could do for yourself. Because of all that stuff that you just mentioned, you are absolutely right. You are incapable of being able to succeed. You need to be taken care of. You and everybody like you needs to be taken care of. Maybe we give you some money. We find some nice housing for you. And, can you read? Can you read it all? Because I don't want to assume that you could read. Like, when you start speaking like that, of course, the first thing that happens is their pride gets attacked, and they react usually. They react in a way that you would hope they would react, where they basically go tell me to go fuck myself in so many words, and the idea of it is we have to be careful about just treating blame like that hot potato. And they look at the story that is constructed from assigning this blame to all these other parties. And there are some of them that I believe, and I truly believe that they do this sincerely. They believe what they're saying. But it's a paradigm shift that needs to occur, whereby you say, okay, you're right. You have no power. I thought you actually had power. Turns out you don't, because of all these things that you're describing. And that's when they start pushing back. And after they push back, you could say, well, if you are capable, then why haven't you done it? Obviously, all these things were done that were wrong and terrible, but do you have the means by which to succeed despite all those things? So then at least you get them to start paying attention to what they're capable of that they have not yet executed. Like, what is doable that you have yet to do? And maybe we change the terms. Maybe we don't call this blame or even accountability. Maybe we call these opportunities. The language is irrelevant. It's really the actions. Are you somebody that can do something? You guys, I'm sure, have seen my chart, right? My flow chart on complaining. It's like when somebody complains, the question you ask is there anything you could do about it? If they say no, then you are absolutely being helpful, I would say, to tell them, then shut the fuck up about it. If they complain and you ask them, is there anything you could do about it? They say yes. And you should say, well, then do it. Why don't you do it? If you find them complaining again, you say, well, did you do the thing that you could do? If they say no, you just keep repeating, do it, until they do it. They complain. You ask them, did you do the thing you're supposed to do that you said you can do? I would say you're supposed to do. Did you do it? They say yes. I say, good. Now shut the fuck up about it. At some point, we need to shut the fuck up about the things we're complaining, because that sort of closes the chapter of that obstacle. The people who find themselves repeating this narrative of victimization usually don't know how to close the chapter on solved issues. Once this is done, we close the chapter. We don't deal with that anymore. Why? Because the things we carry with us are part of and a component of our identities. You don't know what it's like to grow up as a black man in America. Okay. Like, what the fuck is the point of that? I don't believe in accepting weakness from individuals. I would argue that most of the people, especially where racism is concerned, any debate or argument that I found myself in the middle of, because it's usually not a debate that I invest in, it's a debate that they seem to be, this is some existential battle they're fighting, and I'm just sharing my logic. But whenever you have somebody who is arguing the validity of racism and victimization, I find myself arguing that I think they have more power than they think they have, which is it's a weird position to be in these types of arguments, where you're telling them they're strong and they're saying, no, I'm not. And if it becomes too obvious that that's what's being said, they'll change. They'll go from no, I'm not to, yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's like, no, either you're capable or you're not capable. It's like, yeah, but my great grandfather was a slave. Okay, let's do about it something that you could do about it. What do you mean? I don't know. What can we do? Well, I can't do anything. Then shut the fuck up about it. It's like I can't succeed. Why? Because people I never met were attacked by people I don't know. There's at some point we're either going to be adults or we're not going to be. Now, why does this all transpire? Which is funny, because you look at other countries that have also, a lot of racism involved and a lot of histories of discrimination and maybe even slavery and all these things. But let's say a lot of these countries don't have the same surpluses that we enjoy here. They get over that shit. Why? Because they got shit to do. And again, I would argue that is another sort of very common backdrop to a lot of these categories of individuals in this country, the professional victims. It's like they ain't got nothing going on. Or worse yet, we have a system that is so dysfunctionally, has been so dysfunctionally modified by this victimology that complaining about being a victim is actually a way to win in this aquarium of society. The bigger victim we are, the more shit we get. You could listen to plenty of academics talk about, the absolute reality of during the 60s, there being families, single mothers, who had less help from the government if they had a man in the house than if they did not have a man in the house. And how having a man in the house represented an increase in wealth that was less than the assistance you would get by not having a man in the house. So it incentivizes, in those situations, eliminating the men from the home, because you get a bigger piece of the pie without the man there. So it allows a family who doesn't have this sort of transcendent belief system and structure of what is right, of what they're going to do. They design their life according to what they can get through the artificial means of government. I believe in marriage, unless the government's cutting a check. Like there's some people who are going to get married and stay married because that's what they do. That's who they are. They understand on a transcendent level how their identity overlaps with that ritual. It's never a money thing. You look at imagine all the guys that are married to ugly girls. It's like, oh yeah, that's my wife, and that's just how it is. She could stand to cut a couple of calories, maybe throw a fucking body weight squat in, cut a carb, maybe you don't have seconds on the fucking French fries, maybe all those things, but it's my wife, because it is so ingrained in their identity that it's not on the negotiation table. They can't be convinced through monetary means to discard an element of their identity. But you put a group of people in an environment with enough surplus for a long enough time, you get rid of all the rituals that allows them to have a greater loyalty to the group than to their own, hedonistic drives and desires. It's like, yeah, get them away from the group enough, like go look at the history of public school education. It's like, yeah, they'll start thinking that, what, maybe the second car is more valuable to me than putting the extension on the house so that grandma doesn't need to stay in an old folks home. Maybe me, the wife, and the kids' family vacation to fucking Bermuda. Do people go to Bermuda? I don't know. They go to, maybe that's more important than helping my brother change the roof on his house that's falling apart. Maybe there's just a lens through which people in this surplus laden society look at morality, look at the drives that are harnessed towards outcomes. And this entire game is constructed through rules that were created by people who are looking to control everybody. Like if I'm running a government, right? If I'm king of the government, let's just say, and I'm a piece of shit, right? Because I don't think you'll find many kings that aren't pieces of shit. But let's just say I'm a king of the government. I'm also a piece of shit. And I'm trying to, put on my Machiavellian hat and figure out how to incentivize certain behaviors to make sure I continue to amass wealth and control. At the same time, castrate any potential, pushback, to my reign, right? To my lead. What am I going to do? I'm going to get people addicted to shit. I'm going to have them buy stuff. I'm going to have them unhealthy. I'm going to incentivize a disconnection from the use of their bodies. I want them entertained. It's fucking bread and circuses. This isn't a fucking new thing. I'm going to have them forget what actually makes them whole and powerful. Movement of the body, connection with other people, the anchors of tribe that keep us from existing completely in our heads. Those are the things that are important. Those are the things that were required at a certain point in history. Prior to the symptoms of surplus we see in modern Western civilization, these were things that happened organically or you died. That's how that was. People didn't need to be sold on the value of loyalty to your group, because if you didn't have a group, you were by your fucking self. Right? You were bait for whatever predators were around, people or otherwise. But nowadays, you got to sort of make the case about why it's valuable to be close with your family, why it's valuable to be connected to people that matter, people who see in you an ability for them to be successful. Right? So how does useful intel morph into an anchor of one's capabilities? Well, if we're looking to blame somebody and we're looking, at this category of blame as nothing but a list of drivers or inputs that together collectively created this output, if we take just a subset of all that that's connected to an individual, we say, well, he's the one, we ignore all that other power. It's very hard to learn, right? And in sports, you'll see this, and it's a little bit cheesy, but there is some truth to it. You either win or you learn. I would argue when you win, you learn about winning, right? There's some learning to be done there too. But it is true that when you face resistance, you are stimulated to solve the problems that resistance has produced. If everything you try works, how do you develop endurance? How do you develop resilience, anti-fragility, all these concepts that we know we want to aspire to have? How do you do that in a world where you never lose? In other words, we want to own the blame that belongs to us because those are the opportunities we have to grow. You go to lift a weight and it doesn't lift, and first thing you say is, oh, well, this floor is uneven, or I don't think these weights are calibrated, felt off. And, or you were just not fucking strong enough to lift it. Let's start with that. It's probably the most useful, conclusion that you can come to. Own your shit first, right? Keith says, what's up, Keith? He says, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Absolutely. Aaron says, and then you have the people that have more kids for another child tax check. Absolutely right. Because again, it is a product of the system. Because if, and this is worth, I would say, just putting a snapshot on. If you hear of a lady, let's say that lady has a new kid, and you go, oh, congratulations, you have a new kid, and you and your husband wanted another one, I take it. I don't know, you're being a nosy fuck, some lady on the shopping market line. And she goes, no, well, I actually, I had another kid because I get more money. I still love the kid, but, that was the main thing. I get more money from the government if I have another kid. Like, we're going to have some sort of reaction to that, right? We're going to want to criticize that. We might know how to not know how to handle it in a moment, but we're definitely going to have something that does not agree with our premise, and we're probably going to be motivated to say something. But what is it we're going to say that isn't rooted in a morality that nothing in today's society incentivizes? Why would you do that? Why would I not do that? Because it's wrong. It's like, what do you mean? It's another fucking $2,000 a month. Like, whatever the fuck. I don't know what they're giving for kids these days. But the idea of it is, we have to just understand that at a certain point, there is no common morality to be referenced. So when you're telling people it is wrong to have another kid just so you get more money from the government, they literally do not understand why. They haven't, abandoned any belief system, any culture of morality that they were, trained in, that is a component of who they are. No. Years ago, I remember doing a podcast episode, and I called it The New Fatherlessness. The New Fatherlessness. And it was when kids grew up with dads, but it was almost like they didn't grow up with a dad because their dad suffered all the symptoms of not having a dad, right? So you'll have this generation where, and this doesn't happen all the time, obviously, but it is certain at the scale now where it's fairly common, where the dad will be home, but he's not doing any fatherly shit in that house. He is not assuming the role that complements the role of the mother effectively, naturally, historically. Like, he's not playing that role. He winds up almost being another kid because he didn't have a dad. And maybe he has a lot of emotional formulas to deal with life's adversities that his mother taught him. And even though he's present for his children, he doesn't have any of these formulas, these masculine formulas to share with his kids. So it's like having a dad, but not having a dad. So I think a lot of times the criticism, the very valid, mind you, criticisms that we have of people that are doing these absolutely abhorrent things, we also have to acknowledge that many of them don't even understand our criticisms. They don't understand why we would have a problem with it. Keith says, ugly wife, happy life. There might be something to that, man. I wouldn't know. My wife's hot. John Wiley, what up? Aaron says, not sure that's the thing in the U.S., but also it's here. Aaron's one of my spies in Canada, so she's letting us know what's going on north of the border. Aaron, I guarantee it is here in multiples of what you might see up there. She adds, it's like calling your brother dad at that point. Well, absolutely. When you have grown men that act like another one of the children, that's absolutely the case. You know, it's it's a joke that a lot of wives make. And like, listen, a joke's a joke. I get it. But this sentiment that, oh, he's like one of the kids. The wife says that as sort of a little bit of a joke, breaking some balls, but talking about how valuable she is, it's like, I have all these kids. To me, it's so self-deprecating. It's like, well, why would you marry a child? But to be fair, I'm that asshole, right? I'm that guy that reacts that way. Because any like weak language or language that's just dysfunctional, like, I really am not involved, in that. Like, I'm not signing those papers, so to speak, right? I remember I had a girlfriend when I was younger, and we were at her university, and we were going to a frat party that night with her and her friends. And she just kept asking me to promise, please don't get into any fights. Please don't get into any fights, right? Because I've been like this a minute, right? And I'm like, of course not. I'm not gonna get in any fights. Like, I want to have a good time. I want to have a good time, right? And telling myself, oh, please don't get in any fights. Get in any fights. And we're on the line at this frat house, like to get in. They're doing there. You pay at the door, you get your fucking cup. Like, I don't know the fucking rules of these things, but we're there. And there's a drunk guy who is, I guess, a member of the group, the frat, outside. And he's talking to everybody online. There's music inside, whatever. And we're like online waiting to get into this house. My girlfriend at the time, and whatever, and her friends. And the guy's going from person to person, like, oh, you're going to get fucked up tonight. You're going to have a good time. And everyone's like, yeah. They're doing all that corny shit. Now, me, I don't drink. I don't do that. I don't get fucked up. Like, I've never been drunk in my life, And I just can't go along to get along sometimes. So as this dude's making it from person to person, I'm sitting there and I'm like, fuck, I hope he doesn't fucking say anything to me. So he comes to me and my girlfriend and that crew at the time, and he's like, oh, you guys ready to get fucked up, whatever? And I'm like, yeah, we're gonna have a great time. I say something like that. And I couldn't bring myself to agree to what he was saying, but I had to say something, and I was trying my hardest not to be anomalous. But as soon as I said, I'm gonna have a great time, which was completely me acting, right? It's like just fucking terrible tradecraft is like a fucking operative in this fucking social environment. And as soon as I said that, he goes, but you're going to get fucked up, right? It's like, God damn it. It's like, so long story short, maybe long story long at this point, he was like, yeah, fuck you. You shouldn't be here. And I'm like, fuck you. I'll fuck you up. I'll fuck all your gay drunk friends up. Like, I made it a whole fucking thing, right? Now, what was the point of that? The point of that is there's a certain point where a man, and I don't think that's a great example of the application of this idea, by the way, but the concept. There's a point where a man stands for something that's just non-negotiable. And usually the rigidity in that belief system provides an anchor of stability in the environment of a home. When you remove that anchor, the energy in the environment of the home is like a fucking roller coaster. And it's an emotional language, an emotional transaction that's normalized. And those are the tools that a lot of the people that grow up in those types of environments bring with them into adulthood, right? So let's get to the last part of the last question I wrote in the email, which is, why should men do away with using blame in their approach to building power? Understand that blame, like a lot of weak coping mechanisms, feels good. There is a catharsis in it. That is not the entirety of the relationship we should build with these things. Meaning, looking at blame, we should understand that when I use blame to feel better, I am encouraging the rejection or the repelling of my own accountability in an outcome that I don't like. It's very hard to be a good student if you can never admit you didn't do anything wrong. Running a school for 20 plus years, and it being the incredibly valuable lab on these, interpersonal dynamics, in a pressurized environment that a martial arts school provides. But one of the things you'll see the people, this is like a recurring archetype. The new guy who can't wait to share with somebody what his preferences are in the curriculum of the given martial art. How it manifests is the white belt who's been here 5 months telling the white belt who's been here 1 month, well, what I like to do from this situation, as if there is any inherent value in what his preferences are 5 months in. But what happens is it allows for a status that placates his insecurities. And because he gets something out of it, early on, the progress, or at least the momentum of his progress, is stifled. Because he goes from admitting he knows nothing and being open to everything to knowing enough that he knows more than some people, and he spends all his time protecting the status to them. When we are looking to place blame on other people, we are looking to win a social contest. And the contest's reward is that you don't have to account for the outcome. So if I get everybody to believe that it was Harry's fault, I don't have to bear the brunt of the consequence that Harry does. The consequence goes to him. But in avoiding that consequence, I also avoid the pressure that's going to allow me to not make that same mistake again. The reason blame is weak is because it is a rejection of opportunity. It is a rejection of responsibility, in some cases of duty. It is not built of the stuff that great men are built from. So I think I covered everything. Looking through the comments, every once in a while I go back and I find a comment that I have no idea the context. Like Aaron says, a lot better than growing up as a black man in South Africa, which I think is more entertaining without context. It's like, yeah, here's a statement. I'm sure it was completely appropriate when you wrote it, Aaron. Sorry, I didn't see it. But all right, we got it there. I think I sent everything I wanted to. I appreciate you guys for hanging out. If you guys haven't gotten my emails or signed up for my emails yet, how many times do I got to fucking tell you? MasterChimLetter.com, or you can go to one of the links in the description. Everything that I do, from the book to my mastermind group to a whole bunch of other stuff, it's in the description. Check it out. But aside from that, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I always have a good time doing it. I will be here next week, same time. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.